Hello everybody, and welcome to the National Extension College and OCR webinar for our A-level geography launch. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes, just as I know some people are arriving, and then we'll start to present. If you are arriving, do say hello in the chat. It's always nice in these webinars to see and hear who's with us. If you feel brave, just say hi. And also where you're from, if you're in the UK, and if you're studying somewhere up north in the windy south at the moment. So do say hello if you would like to. Oh, hello, Elena. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Welcome. Thank you for saying hello. Always good to start it off. It might encourage others too. So we are recording this. Hi, Michelle. Good to see you as well. Bath, lovely city. Thank you. So I'm going to start. So first of all, thank you for those who are using the chat. So if you have got any questions, please do pop them in the chat box and we'll get to them. Thank you all for joining our launch webinar. We are very excited to be able to present our A-level in geography, which can be studied at a distance, online, with tutor support, at a pace and a time suitable for you, and a very flexible approach to learning. I'm Esther Chesterman. I am the CEO of the National Extension College, and it's with great pleasure I'm welcoming Shelley Monk. Shelley is the Geography Subject Advisor from OCR, and that's the specification this A-level is following. Shelley gave a little wave there so that you know which is which. So Shelley and I will be talking you through a number of options around what we're going to be discussing. If you can just move the slide on for me, Charlotte, that'd be great. We've got somebody in the background doing our slides for us. So Shelley's going to talk around the educational context of the geography specification and the lived curriculum aspect, which will be really fascinating. So thank you, Shelley. I'm going to look at the National Extension College learning design and just talk you through some topics and how you would, as a student, engage with the topics in a self-study, self-learning perspective. And then we'll look at the skills, the geography skills that you'll be developing. And Shelley and I will both discuss that and look at the fieldwork perspective in particular, which is a really exciting part of this specification. Moving on from the skills, Shelley is going to then talk about the sorts of jobs and careers an A-level geography could take you into. And there's quite a lot of jobs of the future that Shelley will start to discuss. And then at the end, we'll capture your questions. So do type them in the box throughout. So don't worry, we won't ignore them. If you've got any, we'll hold them until the end. And then Shelley and I can then answer the questions, whichever is relevant, whether it's an exam board perspective or whether it's a delivery perspective. So anything, no question is a silly one. Please just ask away. I'm sure it's something lots of people will be wanting to know. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Shelley. He's going to go through the first two sections of the presentation, which are the educational context and the lived curriculum. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Esther, very much. If you could roll on, Charlotte, that would be absolutely great. We thought it would be very helpful to give you some context about our qualifications. So we're talking about going back in time a little bit and understanding a little bit about the A-level geography. If you could move forward, Charlotte, that would be great. Thank you. So what I've called it is the educational context, and it's really to understand a little bit about when teachers first started teaching our A-level qualification, when it was developed. So we talk about a period of time when we talk about geography reform, and that was in 2014 and 2015. So when I first joined OCR, which was a really exciting time. And what that meant was we went through a period of reform, working with the Department for Education, working with a range of stakeholders, working with the subject associations, who were very key in thinking about the content that was going to be available in the A-level geography. And also a really key group of people were called the A-level Content and Advisory Board. And they were a group of academics and colleagues in higher education, thinking also about colleagues in a sixth form college context, and again, the subject associations. And it was their expertise that helped to shape the Department for Education subject content. What happens at that stage is the Department for Education provide the subject content to all of the exam boards, and from there we can then shape the content really from that subject content into something that's deliverable. So Esther referred to it earlier as the lived curriculum. So there's several stages. There's Department for Education subject content. There's what exam boards make of that content and put that together as a package, which hopefully teachers would enjoy delivering in school. And we've had lots of positive feedback about our A-level, which is brilliant. And then obviously the key people like yourselves, who are the people that are going to engage with that curriculum, and how, and Esther will talk about how the NEC have put that together and what that lived experience will be like for you as people enjoying that curriculum. So with the DFE subject content, there was a talk about the idea of kind of core content, which made up 60% of the qualification, and then 40% of that was optional content, and we'll touch on that in a minute. And the content provided was developed into what we call the specification. So, of course, I have trustily got mine here, just on hand in case we wanted to refer to it. And what that meant was it was important for us to have topics that teachers would enjoy delivering, but most importantly, students would enjoy learning. We wanted our qualification to be engaging, and we wanted to think about the support that we would offer in terms of developing skills, and we'll talk about those a bit later on, so that the qualification offered opportunities for progression pathways, whether that's careers or whether that's on to further study. What our qualification development included was we did lots of consultation with teachers, with subject organisations, with students, and a wide range of stakeholders in what we called our geography forum. So, gosh, they were robust and really exciting discussions at the time. And it was really integral to how we put our specification together, because people gave us really honest feedback and said, what would I teach in that bit? How would I shape that with my students? And some students saying, don't really understand what that might look like in a school context. And that was really helpful for us to shape what we ended up building. We're also very lucky in that we have access to a big research team within OCR and also within Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So we utilise those skills. So we looked at things like accessibility of assessments, accessibility of resources, because geography teaching and also geography qualifications are really, the exams are very resource rich. So of course we need those to be accessible. The other part that's in our specification, we can often focus on the topics, but we also have fieldwork and geographical skills. And as Esther said, we will talk about those because they're really exciting. And as a former geography teacher, the bits that I really love, they're really integral to the qualification. So they're assessed as well. And we'll talk about that as the webinar goes on. The independent investigation was something that was reintroduced back into geography. So that was around several years ago. Then we had a period without it and the skills were assessed for examination. But the independent investigation has come back in. Some people call it coursework. Some people, we officially call it the non-exam assessment. And that basically means that you don't step into an exam room to actually do that. It's something which is you develop and will be talked about a bit later on. And it really, the thing that we found exciting about that, and the subject associations were very excited about it, is you can take a little bit of the spec and go into it in more depth and have that realistic real life geography and develop some fantastic skills. So a couple of other aspects just to mention on the slide is our assessment structure, which is over on the right hand side, although probably a little bit small. It's all outlined in the specification. I'm sure Esther will probably touch on that anyway. We've got 3 exam papers. Components 1 and 2, physical systems and human interactions, are very similar in style, split up into sections. And there are a range of different style questions. And of course, because it's A-level, there's some delicious essays in there just to get our brains working. And then we've got geographical debates, which is our 3rd component, our 3rd paper. And we'll talk a bit more about some of those topics in there. So that was I referred earlier to optional content that we developed as exam boards, and it's the topics within the geographical debates that were really over to us and our stakeholders developing those topic areas. And then, of course, part of the A-level assessment, as I mentioned earlier, is that investigation, which is worth 20% of the qualification. Thank you. So in terms of the lived curriculum, I think this is quite a nice link here. So one of the things we wanted to emphasise is that there is some flexibility for teachers and for students in terms of the topics that are chosen. And obviously for an organisation and a college like NEC, it means that their expert tutors and the people crafting this course can obviously pick from those topics as well. So within the core content, we had optionality within landscape systems between coastal, glacial or dryland landscapes. And then we've got obviously the global systems, which is examined in our second component. And global systems give some optionality around either trade in the contemporary world or global migration. There's about an even balance in terms of those two topics. They're both enjoyed equally. And of course, with everything that's going on globally at the moment, you can perhaps see how our global governance topics are really pertinent. So we've got a choice there of either human rights or power and borders. Now, I touched on in the previous slide the idea of our geographical debates topics. So we've got 5 topics listed in the specification, and I noticed that the NEC, particularly at the moment, has got a focus on climate change and hazardous earth. So both really contemporary, interesting, dynamic topics, and we'll touch on one of those particularly a bit later on. But all of those topics have landed extremely well. We've had very positive feedback from teachers. Disease dilemmas is another really popular topic, climate change, and as we mentioned, hazardous earth. And I think hazardous earth in particular, because it's a topic that teachers have been used to delivering, and students of all different ages have quite enjoy that global aspect. And I think that's really nice way to draw in some of those really exciting case studies that we often talk about in geography as well. And I think we're particularly delighted because obviously bear in mind I said this was developed in 2014-15, that particularly with things like climate change, you know, we can very proudly say we're the only exam board to actually focus on that particular contemporary and really critical topic. So we're delighted with those choice of topics. They've remained contemporary. So particularly with global and national agendas with climate change, we've had the recent COP26, obviously within the UK, food security, ocean health, which appears more and more in the media, which is really interesting. And of course, sustainability and disease, particularly as you're very aware of what we've lived through the last couple of years. So obviously on the right hand side of the slide, you can see some of the sort of positives that we would talk about. So that flexibility, that engaging content. What I did mention, I haven't really sort of touched on yet, is the idea that we have concepts within geography, and those are kind of really big ideas. So things around kind of sustainability, risk, resilience, mitigation. So there's a range of concepts, and they are dotted throughout all of the relevant topics. And of course, case studies, which bring some of that content to life in those specific sort of country or regional and local contexts. Within our curricula, you can obviously go into more depth with the chosen topics. And we've tried to keep those as engaging and contemporary as nature. And the reason we've done that is how we've tried to do that is through some of the inquiry questions in the specification. Us geographers like to ask some of those really big, powerful questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelley. It was good to touch on some of the topics that we've chosen. So obviously, as a college who's delivering the course, we've designed the course with the optionality chosen for the learners, but we've made decisions based on our research and based on, as you say, relevant things that are happening in the world that we felt would be really intriguing and sort of exciting for our learners to study. Please, again, do put any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. So we do use subject experts. We spend a lot of time with our developers who know geography very well, but also understand online self-study learning. So understand that pedagogy of how a student will engage with the material and to help them move through the material in a way that prepares them for the assessment and develops their learning, their understanding and their skills. So it's a fully self-study course. We have tutors, our tutor experts, who support through the studies through subject forums where you can place questions and discuss things with your with the cohort or those who are studying with you. There's a messaging function where you can talk to your tutor about specific elements. And there's the crucial element is formative assignment, feedback and support, alongside the non-examined assessment, the NEA and the field work. So you'll have quite a wraparound of support and engagement from the tutor, but the material is where we put a lot of our thought, our resources, our energy. So you can pick it up at a time that you want, you can study it at a moment that's right for you, and then engage with the material in a way that supports you and your learning style. So I've got a very short little 1-minute video now, which just gives a little walkthrough of some of our material and some of the activities. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a sort of slightly more deeper dive into one of the actual topics. So we can just play the video, please. Thank you, Charlotte. Very quick, but hopefully it gave you a little taster of some of the sorts of activities, very engaging activities, I hope you'd agree, that would really move you through your studies. So we're just going to move through the slides now and just have a look at one particular topic, which is Earth's life support system. And this is just to give you a little taste of how we move from the specification that Shelley described, the work that happened in the background around developing the specification, and then how we move it towards the activities. So I'm not a subject expert, I'll say that straight away. So if you've got specific questions on geography, hopefully Shelley might be able to answer those. But you can see on the left-hand side, that's an extract from the OCR specification, highlighting the case study of a tropical rainforest. So we can just move on to the slide, please. So for this topic, I have multiple ways that you'd be able to engage with the learning that you'd need and how to explore the case study. We'd have clear learning objectives at the beginning of the section. So you'd be able to see how it linked to the specification, linked to the final assessment, and what you'd be developing during the topic. Next slide, please. And then from the video you saw, there's a host of interactive activities. You can do one, come back to it a later time. You can work through a topic in one sitting, entirely up to you. And you can bookmark where you've got to and then go back to it. There's external reading. You get access to an ebook, which is really exciting. It has lots and lots of the additional resources that you need, and lots of videos. So obviously you can have lots and lots of videos on YouTube that you could go and look at. But what we've done and our subject experts do is to curate the right videos for you to make sure these relate and are relevant to the specification and to the key concepts that you're studying. So you don't need to go down a deep hole in the internet. You've got everything you need on the learning management system. Next slide, please. So once you've completed all your activities, you've got to the end of a section, you can do a short self-reflection, the areas that you're looking to have studied and to make sure you've engaged with them in the right way. You can then have an assignment. You have an assignment that you will be working through. This is formative, and by formative we mean it's not externally assessed or goes towards your final examined grade. This is something for you and your tutor. So you work through your assignment, you'll submit it to your tutor. You can, in the meantime, ask your tutor questions on our platform or through the messaging system, and then you hand it in and your tutor will give you some really deep feedback. And that feedback's vital because that will really help you engage with the assignment, engage with the material. The assignments allow you to embed your knowledge. They allow you to look at some exam practice questions, and it's to understand any gaps there may be in your learning before you move on to the next section, because quite a lot of the specification, it's what's called scaffolded learning. It moves you through your knowledge so that by the end of it, you are developing some higher order concepts that at the beginning you might not even think you knew, and then you work through the specification in that way. So it's really important to upload your assignments and receive your feedback from your tutor. So Shelley talked at the beginning around the development of skills, and we believe it's really important in the course that you understand geography skills. And one of the key features, as it says, of the OCR specification is the opportunities for learners to gain vital geographical fieldwork and life skills. So within our course, you complete 4 days of fieldwork covering both physical and human geography topics. And we've approached this requirement by embedding within the course from the first section the fieldwork that you'll be carrying out and the skills that you'll be developing. So from day one, you'll start to think about what it will be that you'll be looking at from your fieldwork, and then moving through to the independent investigation, the NEA, or non-examined assessment. So the course walks you through this in a very gentle but very good way so that you don't miss your deadlines. You work towards your non-examined assessment in a way that feels comfortable for you. As Shelley said, it's worth 20% of the grade, but more than that, it's the way of applying your knowledge, applying your skills, working in an environment and context that you find exciting or interesting or that's accessible to you. So it may be you have the ability to book a trip abroad and look at volcanoes, which would be lovely, or you might want to focus on your local area for your fieldwork and for your independent investigation, and that could be an urban or a rural environment. And you don't need a huge amount of resource, as Shelley said. The resources you need and the way we've developed our particular choice of subjects means it's accessible to home learners, those who may have additional needs, or those who are in an environment where they can't access certain areas because of a physical disability, or just because they don't have the time for other sort of areas that you're working in your life. So our course design is very flexible, and it will support you in meeting the fieldwork requirements, whatever your context may be. So this slide's taken from the last part of our fieldwork explanation. So you start working through your course, and while you're studying, you're making notes about the themes you're interested in, the things that really resonate with you, and what you'd like to investigate further. Start to consider topics that you could actually do. If you can't get to a volcano, perhaps don't choose volcanoes, but choose something else that's a little bit closer to home. And then we have a fieldwork log within our learning management system, within our system, where you can start to log things that you're interested in, start to log any of the activities that you do, and you can share that with your tutor and start to develop the idea around what your independent investigation will be looking at. So you'll need to do 4 days, and you need to evidence those days to the tutor and in preparation for your non-examined assessment. And you're starting to collate that data throughout, and it's all very clearly, clear steps throughout the course that walk you through that. You submit your fieldwork assignment, and then you submit your non-examined, I'm just going to call it NEA, your NEA proposal and your NEA final submission before the deadlines. That all sounds very official, but it's just giving you a little taster of that really important but exciting part of the course, because the fieldwork is where you're really developing those skills. So that's my walk through how National Extension College has approached the delivery of the specification. We're going to next look at areas of jobs and jobs that maybe, and I like that, why bother with fieldwork? So we're going to do a nice segue into the fieldwork aspect from the specification. Why do we have that embedded within the specification, within the NEC course? So I'm going to hand back to Shelley now.
Thank you. I think one of the things that was very exciting when I was talking to Esther and Charlotte about the course, and Esther showed me an example, was the fact that the fieldwork was embedded. And when I was asking the question, sort of why bother with fieldwork, is a question that often is discussed in our webinars, is discussed with teachers. And I think some of that is around the functionality and the challenge that it can be for teachers to take students out. But also, as Esther said, in the context for all of you as learners, people are in very different circumstances. And so when the qualification was reformed, one of the things that was really part of the discussion is, should we still continue to have fieldwork? Should we assess that fieldwork in an examination? Should we assess that through some kind of independent investigation, the NEA? And so that question wasn't really there to be sort of facetious in a way, but it was really saying, as geographers, something that's really important to the study of geography is the opportunity to go out on fieldwork. And so the picture at the top there is actually my students from quite a while ago, actually on one of the last coast field trips, and an international field trip that I did in the bottom slide as well. But I think the idea was to think about, why do we do fieldwork as geographers? And fieldwork can be at all different scales. It could be something that you're engaging in very much your local area. So looking out of an apartment balcony and observing the world around you as you might be going about your day-to-day lives. You're thinking about, transport flows of people, interactions, the human geographical aspects. So when you're taught things and you're engaging with that online learning, it really gives you the opportunity to sort of step back a little bit and almost take a bit of a magnifying glass and sometimes a kind of deeper lens on the content that you're studying. So it can be very difficult sometimes to understand complex language. So Esther talked earlier about Earth's life support systems. And so there's complex language in there, for example, around the carbon cycle. And that might be something you think, well, don't really know much about that. I think I'll do something about that in my investigation. And it can really help bring some of that language to life. The skills that we'll talk about later on when we talk about how they support you in terms of careers that you might be in and developing, or just as a kind of interest within the subject area and green jobs, is that there'll be lots of skills that you develop through fieldwork, through geographical skills, and as you write up your investigations. And I think one of the key things is really going in search of evidence to answer geographical questions. So I mentioned earlier the specification has these kind of big questions built within it, what we call inquiry questions. But I think what's really important for fieldwork is you always set that in the context of a question. And it's a question that has to mean something to you. So in the fieldwork assignments, it might be in the online learning platform for the NEC that there are some of those questions there already, but the NEA will be the opportunity for you to develop a question and something that means something to you that you would like to go out and find that evidence around. We can challenge expected outcomes. So you might ask a geographical question and you think to yourself, okay, well, I want to go out and in real life, what do I find? So quite a lot of students are really interested in our place topic content. And in there's some really nice things that you can sort of sink your teeth into around perception of place. for example, and it might be in the place that you live. So you've both shared Barnet and Bath. You know, it might be that there's some interesting geography that you could look at in the local area in really understanding what are people's perceptions, how safe do people feel, what kind of things do they engage with in the local area, and then think, well, this is what I expect to find, but in reality through fieldwork, this is what I've actually found. We mentioned about the geographical terminology, so understanding what's written in the specification and being able to use that in a sort of live, lifelike sort of context through fieldwork. You engage with the place, as Esther said, if you're lucky enough to go exploring volcanoes, hopefully not a live one, in context, or it can be very much looking at something on a very local level that is pertinent and relevant to you locally. So that engagement with place will range. You'll hear the word scale a lot within geography, but will be determined by where you want to do that field work. And I think it gives that element of kind of real life geography. So through the field work, you'll develop skills of interrogation, of asking those searching questions, of looking at concepts so you can compare some of the things that are in the specification to a real life example. You can talk about coastal processes, but then see them in action. I'm not sure necessarily family and friends would be entirely excited about you sharing some of this, as I found in the past, but understanding processes and gathering your own data and information, whether that's qualitative or quantitative, gives you access to thinking about a range of different skills. And obviously that ability to be able to consolidate or learning new skills. So depending on the context that you're in, if you're already working, some of these may be very familiar to you. Whereas for some younger people who are embarking on this as a new experience, then some of these may literally be new skills that they can hopefully build on and embed throughout their careers or further study. Thank you. So I think one of the things that we talk about with the qualifications, and one of the things actually that we talk about with the subject association, so the Geographical Association and the Royal Geographical Society, and also I'm sure for the National Extension College as well, with the qualifications that they offer, what do you do next with that? So where can your A-level geography take you? Next slide, please. Now, I'm obviously very aware that the context of learners in the NEC is really wide-ranging. So it was really to draw out, what is it our geography qualification offers? And I think this is something that the subject associations are really keen to talk about, because particularly the Royal Geographical Society talks a lot about the idea that geographers are one of the most employable group of people, although I'm sure lots of other people from the subjects that are delivered would say something very similar. But I think drawing on what we were talking about with fieldwork, one I've just put on there, the skills you develop during your A-level course will support you in applying for further study or a career. Now that obviously depends on the context of which you're coming into the NEC, but conducting research is obviously going to be really key, particularly for the non-examined assessment. We talked about field work and also geographical skills. So whether that's engaging with equipment, whether it's going back and learning and looking at some of those map skills, and also within the geographical skills, there's some high level techniques of analysis. So some of those could obviously be really helpful for current jobs that people are doing, or sort of future careers as well. Writing up an investigative project, I'll be honest, when I've taught these kind of things and when teachers have said to us, it can be quite scary for students initially because it looks like an enormous piece of work, but it is structured, it is broken down, as Esther said, and there are those signposts and support as you work through them. But what's really important in the investigative project and process is that idea of critical reflection. It is an inquiry approach. So you take that question, you sort of forensically pull it apart, you look at the real life geography, you think about the data and the information that you've got, and then you're able to kind of draw that together to some kind of analysis and conclusion. Those are really high level skills. Obviously that idea of presenting and synthesizing arguments using evidence, so that can either be through the exams, so within geography, We've got synoptic links, and that will be explored with you through our component 3 and through certain geographical debates topics. And a synoptic link, we think a lot synoptically as geographers, and that means when we ask some of these big questions within geography, we're starting to make links across topics within the specification and across different places globally, and bringing in some of those kind of high level concepts as well. So if we ask a question around, why are some places more at risk from tectonic activity than others, in order to answer that question, you draw on a number of different topics. So ideas around development, around sort of government spending, around international agendas in terms of sort of technological advancement. There'd be lots of things. So that's what we mean about sort of thinking synoptically, and again, really sort of high level skills. Obviously, the access and use of ICT, particularly when you're presenting your independent investigation. But there are often opportunities, and Esther showed really nicely some of those tools that you'll be able to use and engage with through their learning platform, means that, so for example, there are specific jobs involved with geographical information systems, and that's become a really sort of pertinent field for geographers, and so you'll have opportunities to engage with things like that, and Digimaps through Ordnance Survey are just a couple of examples. We've mentioned analysis, and then obviously understanding complex global and national issues. So we know, for example, that climate change and hazardous earth, other topics that are kind of within the core section of the specification, have been included in that sort of rich diet of topics offered by the NEC. And so what you will do is look at case studies, you'll look at and those will be really topical. Some of those case studies won't necessarily change. So for example, if you were looking at coastal landscapes, they don't necessarily need to be quite as dynamic as if you were looking at trade or migration or human rights, for example. One case study in the textbook, for example, is Afghanistan, and several teachers and students have talked about, how do we address some of the challenges that are going on in that country and the dynamic nature of things we're seeing. Global territorial integrity and sovereignty is being talked about a lot in the news at the moment, with the challenges around Ukraine and Russia, and obviously the global community. So I think there's some really fantastic things that you will develop and you will talk about and think about as part of this course. And of course, all of those are transferable to either to build on your skill sets already, or sort of future learning and sort of career development as well. So that links nicely onto the last couple of bits here before we move over to the questions, which will be great. What we've got in our, what we call our summary brochures, we've got a list of careers, and thinking about Key Stage 5 is when you're doing your AS and A levels. So we were thinking about, obviously there's a university option, or there are lots of jobs which can appeal to geographers and do appeal to geographers. And some of those are listed on that slide there. So obviously some obvious things around kind of conservation, estate management, climate scientists, very topical at the moment. And then obviously there's aspects within there, for example, looking at the military, or as we mentioned, geographical information systems. And I also put on that slide, and I know there'll be lots of opportunities to explore these aspects afterwards and have a think about this. But the top right-hand corner came from a sort of current piece of research, and it was actually looking at geography graduates and saying, well, what actually do geography graduates do? And I think that point on the previous slide about the transferable skills is where I was really trying to draw the thread together with that graph. So we might talk about green jobs, and we might talk about almost those direct jobs that seem very relevant to that background in geography, but actually geographers go into a really wide range of jobs. So you can see there things around kind of business, higher education, marketing, and then we've got a range of sort of secretarial, clerical, and so actually a really wide range of fields, because there are such transferable skills. But some interesting, there was an interesting article in the FE News, which I've referred to then. It was talking about top 5 future job descriptions focused on the national skills gap. So the government's done a lot of work around this, and also thinking about their sustainability, environmental agenda, COP26, which obviously happened in Scotland not very long ago. And so I thought it was interesting to see what was being reflected on as the kind of future jobs, which obviously link very nicely with our A-level. But we've obviously got the concepts of sustainability in our specification, in terms of thinking about artificial intelligence, digital content strategists. So there's some really interesting things there, and then renewable energy and talking about that engineering role there. And I think if we just go on to the sort of very final slide, which was thinking about green jobs. Thank you, Charlotte. So there are very specific websites that you can look at and think about in terms of where some of these qualifications at the NEC and geography specifically might be able to take you. And I thought it was quite interesting to look at some of those and think about how they're actually termed. What are those green jobs? Because I've heard people refer to green jobs collectively, but thought actually, what does that look like? I thought the Friends of the Earth quote was quite helpful in thinking about, how do we start to sort of categorize or talk about those? So there seemed to be a focus there around reducing carbon emissions, restoring nature, and that's a really wide field. And then making environmental improvements and thinking about sustainability in businesses, green transport, thermal heating, and actually quite a lot of that we hear about in the media on a relatively regular basis. I don't know, Esther, whether people can access the slides from this, but I've put within the slide notes some links to information from where you can actually find this green job information, and on previous slides, information from the Royal Geographical Society and also the Geographical Association, who've got their research around the types of jobs that appeal to geographers, and jobs and information about those specific kind of jobs if you wanted to have a further look.
So helpful, thank you. Yes, and we can share the slides with those who've registered with us for the webinar. Thank you so much, Shelley. Lots of information, but it's such an exciting qualification, isn't it? There's so many areas to explore. So hopefully that's really, sort of sparked a light in those who are listening to this. So we have come to the question and answer section. So has anybody got a question that they'd like? I know we've covered a lot, so you may need time to think about it. But is there anybody wants to type a question in there that's for Shelley or I? We'll just give a little bit of wait time. Just as we're waiting for questions, you talked about the aspect of definitions. It's really interesting, isn't it, that the words, the terminology is so important, and obviously that can feel quite difficult initially for somebody engaging with, even reading through the specification or the course material. We have a glossary that students can then go to. Are there any tips you have around how to sort of work through that sort of new terminology and how to embed it within your learning?
No, not at all. I suppose I'm sort of going partly to, obviously my role is very much at OCR, so we spend a lot of time talking about support and resources. But I suppose I was trying to cast my mind back to thinking about how I might have approached things as a learner, but also the sorts of things that I did as a teacher to support my students in understanding terminology which is not familiar to them at all. I think part of that is, I think the way in which you structured your course, and because they have those reflective learning activities, I was thinking that actually helps people to embed and contextualize that language. And I think often we talk about in learning that if there are multiple ways that students engage, so if, for example, we were only reading everything, then it's very difficult sometimes to picture what some of those coastal landforms or some of those volcanic hazards look like. But if we have videos you mentioned that were relevant, I saw imagery in the slides that you shared. There's also opportunities to work through some geographical skills activities. So what you're trying to do with that is bring some of that unfamiliar language to life. So I think being able to explore some of that terminology by listening to it, by looking at it, by using it in written form, you're really tapping into all of the senses to try and support people in understanding. Because sometimes students will say going out on fieldwork and you're pointing things out and thinking about what that looks like in real life, suddenly the penny drops.
Yes.
And I think the way that your course is set up and the way that often people deliver our A-level in the classroom, by the nature of geography, it is really interactive.
Yeah.
And so you are often looking at data, or you're looking at a graph or a map. I often used to use images and say, you know, what's going on here? What do we understand about the language that we're using? And I think, like you say, the glossary to sort of understand the formal and
Yeah.
technical definitions of things as well.
Really good answer. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. So we've got a question from Michelle around exam centres. Yes, National Extension College is an exam centre for OCR, so we can work with one of our partners to make sure you can do the fieldwork element and sit the final examination. So if you have a specific question about where you are geographically in the UK, then please drop in a message to our exams at email, and they'll be able to answer your question on that, and they'll be able to help you. But we work with many partners around the UK, so we'll be able to hopefully find somewhere close to you once we know where you are. Thanks, Michelle. And then any good A-level pairings? That's always an interesting one, isn't it, Shelley? Working as I used to with people who are looking to, university progression and looking to the next level after an A-level. Often at the stage when you're looking at which A-levels to take, it feels too early sometimes, doesn't it? I always thought geography is a great one because you're covering so many different skills that are so transferable. Are there any common pairings that you're aware of, or is it just it's so broad it can be whatever you're interested in?
I think it's interesting because people tend to think of it, I think, sometimes as either the sort of humanities pairings. So sometimes students will take geography alongside, for example, history, sometimes alongside English. So the idea there of the sort of essay writing skills and thinking about those kind of big picture arguments and developing and understanding. I think, geography and history sometimes pair quite well because you're thinking about that kind of global and national and local context. The other side of it is often thinking about the sort of scientific route. So sometimes it can work very well with biology, for example, in chemistry. So if you're thinking about topics around kind of oceans, climate change, Earth's life support systems, hazardous Earths, and some of the sort of more physical geography aspects, that can work very well. But I know from my time as a teacher and deputy head of sixth form that we also had students sort of pairing it with things like psychology and English. So I think some of it depends on how students learn, what type of sort of subject pairings work for them, what would work sort of in terms of future career thinking or university applications. It fits well alongside a number of other subjects. Maths is another one that can work well with, because we have quite a lot of quantitative skills, and also with the physical geography in particular. So I think what people tend to talk about is it lining up with humanities and also lining up with kind of broad science-based curriculum, including sort of psychology within that science side as well. But I think, like you say, it just depends on why the students are interested in taking it in the first place. And of course, with A levels, I guess there's always the flexibility. Some people say, well, I've taken it as an extra subject because I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And they have a keen interest in global issues. They're really interested in traveling. So sometimes it doesn't always fit well, perhaps technically, with other subjects that they're doing. Say, for example, if they did physics, maths, and chemistry, but where students were able sometimes to do 4 A levels, it was the one that they felt they could relax in and enjoy. And I think, well, that's nice. So there's more traditional routes, and then because they enjoy it as well.
I think you're correct. It's a sort of cross-discipline A-level, really, isn't it? And it pairs quite well with a number. So yes, choose something you're interested in, and as you say, how you like to learn. Great, thank you. I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. So the recording will be available. So if you do want to go back, because there's a lot of information Shelley and I have shared. So if you do want to go back and review the recording, please do. I'd like to say such a big thank you, Shelley. We're really pleased that you were able to join us today. And we're really excited to start to see our first cohort of students take part in the A-level and receive their feedback and watch them develop, and particularly looking at their field studies, their independent investigation work. That will be, I'm sure we'll get a wide range, which will be very exciting to look at as well. Thank you very much. So we're going to finish the webinar now. Thank you everybody for joining. Oh, thank you very much, Elena. Nice to get some feedback. That's very good of you. And look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.